So, thank you everyone for joining. So, this is a workshop for the Onyx Data August Challenge. The data is financial data, so you have a prepared data set that you can utilize, and you're completely open to how you want to interpret it or on what aspect of it you want to focus on. The data set is exactly the same for every single one of you, but one of the things that I cannot emphasize enough, and I just want to kind of remind you guys that the data set that you get is not necessarily the final data set that you're using for the challenge. What I mean by this, if you can figure out a way on how to enhance the data set, you're more than welcome to do that. If you want to create additional categories, you can do that with either DAX or adjusting the original Excel file. There's no issue with both approaches. That's completely fine. You're learning. That's all good. If you think that, for example, in this data set, we only have data for 1 year. If you want to have, let's say, a year-over-year comparison, like, for example, how did this month perform in comparison to last year, the same month, you can just extend the data set and add another year. That's completely up to you and how you utilize these tools. This is just the base data set that we're giving to you. If you have any ideas on how to make it better, how to make the reporting even better, go ahead and do that. You're completely free to do so. So don't worry about it. If you need another dimension or something, add it, make it work. So just feel free to kind of play around with this, right? Because like I said, this is a playground for you. This is where you can learn new skills. This is where you can test your skills. You can see what other people are doing with this exactly the same data set. So it's a very good environment for you guys to learn. Now, one more thing before we go into the actual data set. A quick thing that I would just wanted to guys to remind is, like, already kind of covered it in one of the questions. This is a reoccurring event, right? So every single month we come up together with Onyx Data, we come up with new challenges, new data sets, and what we want you to kind of analyze and look into. So don't forget to afterwards, also whenever this challenge finishes, to sign up for the next one. And speaking of next one, before the next one is finally announced, one thing that I want to kind of remind you or tell you about, if you haven't seen this before, I'm going to post it in the chat as well. Make sure that you sign up for the top 5 announcement. So the top 5 announcement is basically a webinar where there's going to be a special guest. It's going to be CEO of Zoom Charts. Together, we're going to be going through the top 5 of the reports from this particular challenge. We're going to look at them. As always, we're going to be giving you our feedback of what things we think could have done a little bit better or what works perfectly. And that's our opinion, right? That's one of the things you have to remember. It's not necessarily that something you must do. Certain things, yeah, but everything else, take that into consideration when you're just building your next report. Because the one thing you're going to notice whenever you're working with multiple audiences, not just your own company, is there's going to be different customers, there's going to be different requirements, completely different approaches. The same approach doesn't work for everyone. So you kind of have to play around with what's available, how tech savvy the audience is, what sort of visuals do they use, and so forth. So listen to our sort of expertise on what we've seen so far, what we think works and not, and try to enhance your reports even better. So do not forget to sign up for the top 5 announcement as well. That's one thing. What else? Few resources regarding the challenge and also the visuals themselves. So a few resources that you can utilize, and again, they're completely free of charge, is you can go into the Zoom Charts Academy. I'm going to paste the link as well in the chat. So Zoom Charts Academy is actually, let me just share my screen. That's going to be here. I'm going to be hiding this, going to be switching the screens. Just a few things that you always have to do and figure out. There we go, bringing it here, perfect. So Zoom Charts Academy is a completely free resource that every single one of you can use. And the great thing about this is if you think that you want to use one or the other visual, but you just don't know where to start or what the visual has to offer, you could, of course, go through the documentation, right? The documentation is good, it's very detailed, but let's be honest. Most of us don't really like to read documentations because it basically kind of feels like you're reading a PhD document, right? A lot of technical terms and stuff like that. So another approach that we're taking here is the Academy, where you can take, for example, let's say we're focusing a lot on Waterfall Visual in this particular challenge, or as the name already for the session implies. So what you can do here is you can just open up a segment for the Waterfall Visual, and I go through the visual starting from the very start down to the last formatting options. So I cover what are the main formatting options, what are interesting features that you can utilize, how to use the visual, how to set it up, and so forth. And the sample that you're going to see me here using, let me just, for example, in one video, like for example, you can see there's a sample in the background that I'm showcasing things on. This sample you can just download right here as well. So you can take that example as well and take a look at how I've done things, how I customize them, how does the data look like, and everything. There's everything available to you. On top of that, you can also go to the app stores. And for every single one of our visuals, not just the Academy, which is already a great resource, plus the documentation, you can also open up, let's say, again, the same waterfall visual, and you can download also a sample here. It's going to be a different sample than the one that's in the Academy. And in this one, instead of, a video guided tour, you basically have a report, which again talks about the main formatting options, the main fields, how to use them, different customization options, what to take into consideration, and so forth. So there are multiple ways in how you can learn about the visuals, how to set them up, how to use them, and just get some ideas if you want to. Same goes for previous challenges. You can also see all of those reports. There's a lot, is what I'm trying to say. There's a lot of resources that you guys can use. They're completely free of charge. So, might as well use them. You can, of course, skip everything if you want, but this just gives you an advantage in a sense, right? You know how to use the visuals. You know how to create a drill down approach. So all of that is more than, welcome and to see in the reports and see how you kind of utilize the technology. All right, a few other things that I'm going to mention afterwards, but I think it's time for us to go into the data set itself, right? So let me open up the report, and I'm going to open up just the data view. Oh, it's called the table view. I'm still used to this being called the data view. It's been almost a year, or actually been a year. For me, it's still data view. So what you have in every single one of these challenges is we typically try to give you the data set itself, which consists of 2 pages. The Excel file consists of 2 pages, the actual data set plus a page called dictionary. Do not forget about this. The reason why this is useful is because it gives you a better context of what the column represents, right? How to, for example, use it and so forth, because this is a great way on how you can kind of look into things. This also, in this particular case, we also gave you an example. Once it's already important in Power BI, these are just values. But in the Excel file, you can actually look at the values, right? And you can kind of see in the brackets how things are calculated. So you can also use that logic in order to create custom measurements for different approaches, right? For example, when you're just focusing on revenue or whether you're focusing on expenses, these kind of allow you to at least get a brief understanding of how to control this. Sure, for those of you who already know how to do this, you can disregard this. But for those of you who are new, this is a great way to learn or at least get an idea of how do I even start or what do these numbers, these terms represent. The one thing that I cannot kind of emphasize on enough as well is if there's something that you don't understand when it comes to terminology, like for example, OPEX, right? Some of you may know what this means, some of you might not. If you just want to understand what it does or what it means, don't forget it. It's quite simple. You just open up, say google.com. We've all been here, we've all done this, and just say OPEX, operating expenses. Okay. So that's how you always kind of play around. There's information available in all sorts of things or all sorts of places. Utilize every resource you have. Don't limit to only your knowledge or your expertise. See what's out there. There's a lot of information, a lot of resources that can be used. Now, as far as the data set itself goes, so what we have here is basically the first four columns are representing date in different states. So we have the date itself, and what basically we can see here is that it's the last date of every single month. Okay, then we have just a year, then we have a month name, and we also have month sequence. Now for this one, we actually have had a couple of questions saying that, what's the use of month sequence because it only has number 1 in it? That's actually something we did on purpose. The reason for this is to kind of force you to think about the data sets itself. Because trust me, as much as you would want it to be the reality, not every single time you're going to receive a data set, everything's going to be ideal or perfectly balanced or, just correct. So in this case, what we did is we just forced the value of 1, but in reality, it should be different. In reality, the sequence should represent the month number. So January is 1, February is 2, and so forth, right? There's a sequence to things. So you can always create a new DAX measure, for example, to create the proper ordering, or you change it in the original Excel file. Like I said, both approaches are okay. There's no one particular way on how you can kind of need to handle this. Then we have a business line for the business line, and afterwards we have additional dimensions that describe the business line. So for example, we can see for that particular business line, okay, first row is regarding sales, then it's consulting services, the other income, then there's expenses and so forth. So there's categorization for each of the business lines. There's an amount, there's an expense subgroup. Important thing to notice here is that this is expense subgroup. So this is everywhere where you're going to have revenue, there's not going to be a subgroup. So this is something you have to take into consideration also when making the visuals. And then of course, just different separations between expenses, revenue, expenses group, and so forth. So there's a hierarchy or depth to it as well. As far as the metrics itself, you can kind of see here and be thinking like, well, there's just one value. What am I supposed to do with it? There's a lot you can do with it, right? This is just the base value that you could be getting from your databases or from your customers, where wherever the original data source is coming from. But you can start to separate it into multiple groups. Like for example, just by the numbers itself, we can see that we have some positive and we have some negative values. So the positive values based on the revenue or expense category, I can see that positive is revenue, expenses are negative. Makes sense. So what you could do is you could, for example, create just regular measures for, I have them here, just to have something specific for the revenue. You could just kind of stick to this without the variables and returns and so forth. The reason why I'm using a variable and this approach afterwards is I just wanted to make sure that if I come to a situation where a revenue is not present, I don't end up with a blank in my card. What I mean by this would be something like this, right? So I'm just going to do the following, just to kind of give you an idea, right? I'm going to comment out this, and I'm going to comment out this part. Okay, so that's total revenue. We have total revenue here. If I filter out a category, which is an expense, it's going to be a blank. Now, blanks is something that you typically do not want to have within your reports unless your audience is completely fine with it. I usually recommend to replace it with something else. Either it's a 0, or alternatively, you could also return, for example, not applicable, right? NA, because that defines and allows the user to understand, okay, that value is not applicable for this particular use case. The last thing you want to do is showcase something that doesn't make sense. And blank, it's not necessarily that it doesn't make sense. It's one of the values that just drags your attention to it. It's an attention grabber, right? And you're just kind of stuck with it and don't know, okay, is it supposed to be? Did I just break something? What happened? So it's one of those things that you can kind of look into and understand, okay, how are these things connected? How are they working together? So that's just one of the things. Now I'm going to go back to this one and remove the comment signs. If you're wondering how I'm doing the commenting, you can do this in 2 ways. You can either comment out a specific line, so you can do a double forward slash before a line, or if there are multiple rows and you just don't want to do this on every single one of them, just mark them, control, and a forward slash. Just once, and it's going to automatically do it to every single line that has been highlighted. Again, different approaches, and all of these things you can also find in different YouTube guides and everywhere. So don't forget about the resources, guys. So that's one of the things that you could be focusing on, right? Kind of separating income versus expense. Okay, how are they categorized? So forth. We're looking at monthly data. So what I could also look into, for example, could be things like month over month changes. Like, let's say I already have a measure here. If I would say, not necessarily in the chart straight away, but just to kind of give you an idea of what else you could be looking into. Let's say I'm gonna have a month. Disregarding naming, it's in Latvian. That's where I'm from, Latvia. But if I have the month, I'm also gonna have the month over month changes. I'm just gonna increase. There we go. Drag it in. We can see that January disappears. Makes sense because January is the first month. There's nothing to compare it against. So there's no value for it. But starting from February, we can see how the values have changed. If you still want to have it in, let's say, even a table, you want to have the January, make sure you have a value that is present in the original column. And one thing you could do here is even use the same just regular amount, right? I'm going to drag it in. There you go. So we can see those are the values, and that's how things have changed in comparison to the previous month. You can convert this into a visual. You can look at the absolute values, or you can look at the month over month change. You can look at quarterly change. Like I said, if you extend the data set and add another year, you can look at year over year change. So there's a lot of things that you can do on top of the report. Right? Don't limit yourselves only to what's available already within the report. You can still do things with just the available information, but most of the analysis, even in real life sort of situations, is not going to be coming directly from the values that you already have present. You will have to use different DAX measures. You will have to provide context to those DAX measures and so forth to kind of get exactly what you're trying to do there. For example, even the same amount, right? We could look at each month separate amount values or the net balance or whatever it is in this case. But you could also, for example, create a measure for a cumulative approach. So basically, cumulative just means that you're summing up everything that comes beforehand. So first row is, of course, exactly the same. The second row, 1.1 mil, is basically these two combined, these two, these three combined, and so forth. Different approach. I can showcase how the value has grown over time. For example, how the revenue has grown over time. Or the same approach for the expenses. Okay, how are the expenses growing by the time? Is there any correlation between the growth speed, for example, if you're looking at month over month comparisons? There's a lot of different things that you can do here. So yeah, regarding the data, just be creative. Don't limit yourself to what's just given to you. Think about what you can do with the data set. Like, for example, when it came to sequence, right? I said you can use DAX, for example, to get the sequence or the month number. It's actually not that difficult to do. You can do this in multiple ways. One of the easiest ways, I remember when I learned about this, it kind of blew my mind that it's that simple, but it is that simple. So for example, if we have a Power Query, and if we have a date field, and you can actually, some of you can, yeah, those of you who have known about this, just, paste in chat or, enter in chat just a plus sign. For those of you who haven't, I'm happy I could teach you something today. So for example, if you have a date column, and let's say you want to get out a date number, right? A number representing each month from that specific date. You don't have these columns. You just have the date. All you have to do is click on a date, go to add column. The reason why you want to go to add column, not transform, because you can do this from both of them, is because transform is going to change the original column. Add column is going to add a new column at the end of the model, right? So it's something it basically allows you to extend the data set. In cases where you want to replace the original value, you can use transform. So click on date column, open up add column. Right here at the top, you have this date function. Click the arrow downwards, month, and you can choose what you want from it. If you want just the month number, select month. There you go. A new column which gives you a month number for the representative month. Simple as that. You don't have a month name? Sure. Click on date, month, name of month. You want to know what day? Okay, day itself, day of the week, day of the year. There's different ways on how you can approach this. So if this is something you didn't know, I'm happy I could show you this to you because this is very beneficial and it's super easy. Because when I was starting to learn, I remember what I was trying to do is always, okay, what's the DAX function? Opening up Google again, how do I get out a month number based on a date field? And somebody had a DAX formula, which at the very beginning didn't make any sense to me until I found this. This is how I started off because it's very simple. With a DAX, it's not difficult as well. The formula for the sequence, not super hard, right? You just basically take out the month from the date. That's it. So not everything has to be difficult. A lot of the times we're just making things difficult unnecessarily. But hey, it's how we learn, either from our mistakes or others. Learn from my mistakes. Use a simple approach if it's needed. Just go to Power Query and do it through there. DAX is great when you want to change also some additional context, or I know there's people who prefer doing it through DAX, or in some cases where you don't have access to the original data source. Like, for example, if I would send you the file itself, right now, the PBX file, if I send it to you and you open it up and you would open up Power Query, you would get an error here saying that, hey, I couldn't access the file because it's hosted on a different PC and I cannot locate the file. So with DAX, even though you don't have the original data file, you can still create new columns, right? Different approaches require sort of different issues require different approaches. So that's something to take into account as well. All right, so month over month, one of the things you can look into. Like I said, cumulative is another approach that you can look into. In financial analysis, this is actually one of the numbers that a lot of people are going to be asking for. Not everyone, but cumulative numbers is something that people want to understand, right? How the numbers are increasing over time and where are we sitting currently. Whether the cumulative approach is based on year-on-year basis, quarterly basis, or whatever it is, that depends on the user. So you get the requirements from them and understand how you are supposed to visualize this. As far as some of the visuals go, so what I've done here is I created the three main values that I'm going to be basically using throughout the sample. I'm using net balance, which is just total revenue versus expenses, and total revenue separately and total expenses separately. When it comes to calculating net balance, there are different approaches. What I did is I created the total expenses and revenue measures. So I'm just taking the total revenue minus, I could just say total expenses, but that wouldn't work. Why wouldn't work? Pretty simple. This is a plus, this is a minus. Minus and minus creates a plus, so it would basically create a combinational value, right? So you would sum up the two values. So in order to avoid this, I first say that I'm going to be using a function of absolute, meaning that I convert all negative numbers to positive numbers, and I subtract that from the total revenue. Alternatively, you could also do what you've done in math before, right? Just add another minus. So minus minus, again, makes a plus basically. Or just say that this is going to be with a plus sign. It seems weird that you're adding them up, but if I wouldn't have the absolute value here, but just total revenue and expenses, adding them up makes sense. So it all depends on what data are you going to be looking into. So that's something to take into account. Now, the approach I've taken for the visuals and kind of how I wanted to look into them is the following. I wanted to have basically three different views. I wanted to have a view where I can look at the overall situation, how things are looking, how are they changing from time to time. And I also wanted to be able to switch between an expense view and revenue view. Because in one case, maybe I want to focus on one, in other case, maybe on something else. So this is just a slicer. There's nothing super unique about it. And I'm using the revenue or expense column. Initial model that I had created, I was doing this. I was only allowing a single selection, which makes sense because you can, for example, focus only on expenses or revenues in certain situations. So this was the first approach that I was taking, right? I have expenses or I can switch to revenue. Everything's changing great. Okay, I can work with this, right? So this allows me to switch between the two different views. When I was doing this, I had a few issues with the chart that I had to figure out how to resolve. So for example, when you're switching between them, you can see that the timeline visual, for example, and also the waterfall, it switches from a negative view where you're going underneath the column value. So you're basically going downwards. So these kind of look like, from top to bottom column charts. When you go to revenue, it switches around and now it's going from bottom to top, like a typical approach. These ones are going the same direction. But if I think about a donut chart, for example, and if I wanted to represent the same approach in one or the other, I had to think about how I'm going to represent the values properly. Because if I do not use an absolute value, this is what's going to happen. So when I'm focusing on revenue, you can see we're going from the highest valued slice going down to the smallest value slice. Makes sense. If I switch to expenses, we're going from smallest to the biggest because the numbers are in reverse, right? These are negative numbers. So you're switching between them. And I didn't want to keep this approach because at the end of the day, for the end users, it wouldn't necessarily mean that they easily understand this because the sorting just suddenly switches. Previously, you were going from highest to lowest. Now you're lowest to highest. So one trick that you can always use here, again, if you have different values, positive and negative, is you can use an absolute value. And once I use that, I can switch between the two approaches, and you can see I always keep the approach of going from the highest to the lowest slice. Because even though, for example, I'm focusing on positive or negative numbers, I'm focusing on the highest contributors. That's what I want to do here. Okay, what else? I wanted to have some drill down capability for the donut chart, and the same also for the waterfall, for example. And for the donut chart, you can see that I'm using revenue versus expense group, and then there's the subgroup. And remember, based on the data, everywhere where we have revenue, we don't have a subgroup. So by default, how this would be looking like is like this. I'm going to quickly disable the feature. So how this looks is if I open up a subgroup under expenses, seems good. I can open up the second level, everything's getting filtered out, all good. I can look at the timeline, I can look at the waterfall, how things are adding up cumulatively and so forth. But if I reset and I switch to revenue and open up, for example, sales, it's just one massive slice. So for me, visually, this feels like it's really an unnecessary step. So one of the features that we actually just released for the donut chart as well is you can go under the donut tab and right here, enable this toggle called enable blank categories. What this does is the chart is physically excluding the categories that don't have a name. And in this data set, that's the case. Everywhere where we have revenue, we don't have a name. So what this allows me to achieve is the following. If I'm going for expenses, you can see I have a drill down level. If I go back and switch to revenue and try the drill down, I'm not doing a drill down because there's nothing to drill into, right? The underneath category or the second level category is blank. I'm excluding blank. So this allows you also in certain approaches kind of allow the user to have drill downs or not to have drill downs and have a more sort of, let's say, natural approach to things, right? You don't force them to select a slice and just look at one major slice, right? That's unnecessary. So that's something you can utilize. As for the waterfall, so when I was switching between the two views, I was thinking like, okay, it's interesting, but there's also one more value that I want to be looking at, and that is the net balance. I want to understand how things have essentially created the end value every single month. So revenue minus the expenses. So in order to do that, we can't really keep this slicer to just have two options. Because if you do this, you physically filter out the rows only for expenses or only for revenue. So what I did is I went to the slicers options, disabled the single select, and allowed select all and multi-select with control. So what this allows me to do is, for example, click on select all. The donut chart wouldn't be the great approach here. I would probably switch this to a combo visual or something like that, because even though you're using absolute values, I think you can agree with me that from a user perspective, combining income and outcome in a single visual and then kind of sorting it on absolute value doesn't really make sense. So this is something that I purposely leave here to kind of talk about and showcase to you and kind of, remind me of things to kind of keep thinking about or playing around just to understand if the visual that I created makes sense. As for the timeline, it makes absolute sense because if I go into the focus view, we can see here's the 0 line. So we have column going up and down. So that's all good. All right. As for the waterfall, the reason why I wanted to have both of these available is because now when I have both of them, I can look at the net balance for each every single month. And if I click on it, I can drill down into the business lines, for example. And I can focus on specific expense groups or specific business lines. We can actually add business lines as well here, just to kind of play around with it. So going back, let's say I'm interested in this one. It's the least net profit one. So sportswear, we sold the most. These two, we actually lost money on how we're selling sportswear. And this is how money is coming into sports. How much it cost, how much we made from it, separated into different groups. So you can always kind of play around with different approaches and see what you can do with it and how you can cross filter things. When it comes to the waterfall visual, there are a few things that I would recommend you to play around with. One of them is, remember this column, the sequence? There's a reason why I was talking about it. So by default, how the chart is going to look like is going to be, for example, something like this. Might not seem that there's a big of a difference, but what the chart does automatically is it sorts everything based on a value. So you can see we have January, then December, June, February, so the months are all over the place, right? But this allows you to focus, for example, on the highest earners. In most cases, though, whenever you're going to have a timeline or some sort of association with a calendar, people will want you to have things in chronological order. So you have to figure out how to do this. And one of the ways in how Power BI and our visual allows you to do this is by utilizing a sequence field. A sequence field is a field where you can drag in any sort of sequence that you created. It doesn't necessarily even have to be a month number. It can be anything custom that you create. But in this case, since I'm using months, I'm just going to be using sequence. So sequence field, you find the sequence column, drag it in, and now you can see I have a chronological order of things. So January up until December. So this approach is great because it allows you to switch the visual completely just by changing the sequence of things and how you're looking at them. For example, the sample that I told you about in the app source, we have this page right here. So sequence in P&L statements as well. So without me doing anything else in the visual, right? Exactly the same data. The only thing I'm going to change is the sequence field. So right here, this is how it looks like. And here, I'm just going to use a different sequence. And you can see the chart looks completely different. It's exactly the same data, but sequence allows you to define exactly where each of the columns are going to be positioned. There's another thing happening with the sequence field. If we look at, for example, the data model for this, we can see that, okay, I'm using the sequence. I have category, which is what I'm using on the x-axis, but some of the rows don't have values. See, like total revenue, gross margin, operating income, and so forth. So this is a different data set, just so you know, but this is just to showcase the idea. When you have a sequence, and if you put it into visual straight away, for example, let's make a completely new one, right? So you can see this step by step. So I'm going to say that category is going to be just a single category. Want to focus on the values for 2019. That's how it looks by default. We're going from the biggest to the smallest. And when it comes to cost or negative numbers, we're going from smallest to the biggest. And then the cumulative at the end. So that's how it looks like. Okay. I'm actually going to have two copies just so you can have something to compare it to. Yep, perfect. And now I'm going to add a sequence field. So you can see, okay, kind of looks like not a lot changed here, right? But you can see that there are a couple of these columns that don't have a value. like total revenue, which is exactly the same thing in the data, right? Total revenue, gross margin, operating income, and so forth. And what these actually represent is that this is a subtotal. We allow you to calculate subtotals based on sequence. And in order to activate them, what you would need to do is go into the formatting options, column settings, and right here, find this property subtotal mode. And there are a few modes on what you can focus on. In this case, I'm going to be choosing all, meaning that I want all the subtotals plus the total at the end. In some cases, you might just want to focus on the last total. In some cases, you just want to have an original total column. Like I said, in this case, I want to have all of them. So now you can see these columns appeared, and you also have a value for them. So these columns can be data driven. You can place a sequence in the data model, say that, hey, after, let's say, every 3 months, I want to have a subtotal. The value for that subtotal, I don't know, so I'm going to leave it blank, and the chart is going to calculate it for you. The sequence just allows the chart to understand where am I supposed to be sitting or placing this column, right? It's the same approach. Let's say if I create a completely new data model, right? Let's say this is going to be category, this is going to be value. And like I said, let's say this is going to be January, February, March, Q1, April, May, June, and that's going to be Q2. Value, doesn't matter. 10, 20, minus 10, I don't know. I'm going to keep a blank there. This is going to be 20, 30, minus 17. Or actually minus 20. Yeah, that's fine. So I'm going to leave the Q values empty. I'm going to create another column, which is going to be sequence. This is what's going to allow the chart to understand where the subtotals need to be placed. And you can see in this case, it's very simple. I'm just creating basically an index number. I'm loading that in. So Gori asked, is there Zoom Charts Waterfall by default, or we have to get it from the store? What is the visual name? So you do have to download any custom visual from the app source. You can pin them to the report or an organizational level, but most of the cases you just have to download them. And the chart itself is called Drill Down Waterfall Pro. This is going to be the product page for it. Let me just open it up and just send it to you in the chat. There we go. Sabina beat me to it. Damn it. So Waterfall, our new data set. So let's go ahead and say I want a category. The value was recognized as text. And nope, this was going to be a whole number. So let's just switch the value. Contact number. Okay, let's go to Power Query, see what's going on there. Did I do something wrong? A, B, C. So if I say that this is a whole number, there we go. Now it reads it correctly. Perfect. So category, value. See? The typical approach or the standard approach. Once I add a sequence, it sorts things, but now we have these empty columns. That's because I need to enable all. And what happens when you do all is you can also see that, for example, if the final one is a total, it's going to be replacing the total, the original total column, because there's no reason to have two of them right next to each other. So this is one way on how you can define how exactly the waterfall looks, how it feels, how it works, and so forth, at least certain aspects of it. When you want to focus on the changes, like for example, we all know, typical traffic light. So for example, increases are good, decreases are bad, depending of course on the situation. If you're increasing expenses, that's not good. So keep in mind of your colors. But if you want to change the colors for the sort of categories, I call them so, or the series, find in the formatting options, either you're working with positive changes, negative changes, or total. When you're trying to figure out which one is which, make sure you just think about the number. So negative number is going to be a negative change, regardless of the fact whether you consider this to be a positive or negative. The negative is going to be under negative. So here, I'm just going to say that, for example, positive isn't going to be yellow, it's going to be in this shade of green. So play around with the colors as well, make sure it, fully explains how to utilize it and the user understands just what he's looking into. So that's one of the things. Okay, going back to the original report. What else? Yep, don't forget, of course, about the reset button, just to allow the user to get back to some sort of initial view. That's very crucial. Simple, but still very effective. And the other thing is when you're, for example, working around with the visuals, like in this case, this is an example of how not to ideally do things, right? I don't have to always make examples of how to do things properly. I'm just showcasing how the visuals work and how things work together. So one of the things you have to remember is the visuals by default are issuing a filter, and the filter is going to be recognized by all the other visuals on the report page. So for example, if you go with the story in a specific sequence, like for example, let's say I want to focus on these 3 months. Let's say I create a selection. Okay, I can see how they look here. I can see the values. I can see how it's being split. Like I said, not ideal. Would probably change this to a combo visual just to understand what's coming in, what's going out, changing the colors and so forth. But now I have a waterfall where I can click, drill down, and it kind of makes sense. But the issue with this is that every single click and the way on how I've set it up so far is basically just limiting the data for any of the users, right? If I, for example, first thing I do is say, hey, September was kind of bad for us, 90K, at least minimum 100K should be there. So if I click on it, suddenly this chart is just one single column, right? So think about how you place these visuals, what visual filters, what visual. If you have cross chart filtering, the typical approach is try to separate the information that you have within them, meaning that you're using different dimensions. Like for example, this issue wouldn't be an issue if, and I wouldn't be focusing on the months, but let's say I want to focus on the business lines, right? So I'm going to switch to monthly view. I can say that, okay, I want to focus on sportswear. That's the donut chart. You can see I didn't eliminate half of the visual just by one click, right? So think about the logic of how you're setting things up, what is filtering what, how things are interacting. If you have any slicers, make sure that you add them and you play around with the values. Again, the reason for this is because you might have, let's say, the same business line. I'm going to add it in the slicer. Right now it's filtered, so I'm going to clear it. But here, just to make it more usable, I'm going to make it a drop down. I'm going to, for example, also enable search if there would be more values, right? So if I choose here and say, okay, I want to focus on sports equipment, particular line. Super useful waterfall, right? Just one value, and that value is basically already the total. So total becomes obsolete, and you're just staring in a single column. Everything else kind of looks okay, but you break this visual. So make sure that you play around with the slicers that you add to the pages. And even when you do an on initial glance, it looks okay. Try to do a drill down, try to create an additional selection just to kind of see how things work together. Because trust me, from my experience, what I can tell you is if you give the report to somebody new, they have the amazing superpower of just finding a way to break it. Doesn't matter how long you've been working with Power BI or data analysis, it's an easy oversight to create. You know the logic behind the report. The user doesn't. He just clicks and looks at things. So if he breaks the report, well, he's going to come back to you 2 minutes later and say, hey, this doesn't work. Even though that's the only thing that gives you that result for them, hey, it doesn't work. It's as simple as that. So make sure you play around with the slicers, with the visuals, the cross-chart filtering, the drill down capabilities, because sometimes splitting a visual into two just because to kind of have different views isn't necessary. Sometimes just a simple drill down is all you need. So play around with these sort of different things and look at the resources, look at the examples, and what else? I had a link. Just give me a sec. You can also reference from one of the previous webinars where I was with my colleague Ansh. we're talking about sort of common mistakes made on the reports or drilled. Oh no, that's the wrong link. Yeah, but that's a good post as well. You can look into. But yeah, maybe Sabina or Liana, if you can find the link to the post about the design mistakes, common design mistakes, that would be great to post it also in there. Can we handle it with edit interactions format panel? Yeah, you can of course say that, for example, hey, anything I do here under format, edit interactions is not going to take effect here, or vice versa. For example, this doesn't filter out this visual. But then again, what I'm going to be probably looking at and asking you is, okay, so if I choose nutrition and food supplements, why does half of the chart change and half doesn't? Right? Then you have to make some sort of a distinguished difference between the two areas so I know which visuals are affected by the filter and which are not. You do not want to create a situation where user changes something and for him it kind of seems like it's working for half of it, other half seems broken. But then if I, for example, because this is the worst, you do this, for example, this slicer doesn't interact with this one. You said sports equipment, everything else is filtered by sports equipment, but then you choose, for example, for nutrition and food supplement. This is the end result because you're giving mixed information to the filter. So am I supposed to showcase everything or not? I really don't know. So since I really don't know what to do and I'm getting a filter where business line is sports and equipment and it's also the one that I selected, nutrition and food supplements, there isn't a category that combines both of them. So there's nothing to showcase to you. There's nothing. So always play around with these interactions. Um, all right, I think I'm gonna quickly cover some of the questions that we have in the Q&A section, and then I also have a few last things that I want to mention. So is there an option to custom sort the x-axis of the waterfall chart? I couldn't find it, thanks. Fernando, does the sequence, okay, yeah. Next question was from Fernando. There's the answer for my question. Yes, the sequence field is gonna be the king of defining the sorting order for the waterfall visual. And the great thing about this is, like I said, it's not necessarily something that you have to go around and most of you have probably done this, right? Sort by column, which is a great approach, but there's a lot of limitations to it. So sequence is a completely custom column where you can define exactly how things look like. Like for example, if you would have multiple years and multiple months, it wouldn't be enough to just have a sequence for the month, right? For example, because the same month is possible in 2 years. So what I would probably do is just create a sequence of a combined values of the year plus the month. So I have unique values. Olituin, what is the purpose of the month sequence column that came with the data set? I believe it's supposed to be the month number, if I'm right, but only one value can is one. Can you please clarify this? Yeah, so that one, I quickly covered it in the beginning as well. This was done intentionally. So currently it serves no purpose whatsoever. The only kind of purpose it serves is to give you sort of a hint because month sequence, and if you look at the waterfall you have sequence, so kind of going there, but it was no intention to do that, just happened. But yeah, this was just to kind of showcase to you and remind to you that not always everything is going to be ideally set up for you. Certain things you will have to figure out, fix, to make a report actually work. And in this case, we created the sequence column either by using a month function in DAX, or you can look at the recording where I showcased you how to do this through Power Query. So question from Chukwemeka. Please, when do we use the donut chart? The donut chart is a great visual whenever you're trying to have a comparison or showcase the contribution as a part of whole, right? That's one part of it. And the other thing that's important to remember here is donut chart works best when there's not a lot of categories within it. It's not a great ideal to, for example, let's see, even this is already cutting it close. I would say usually if you're thinking about a visual aspect of it, maximum of 5 slices, maybe 10, but 10 is already the limit, I would say. Everything that goes above it is already you're just bound to create a chaos there. This is the reason why under the donut section we have this property called others, where you can define how many slices you want to see, and the rest gets grouped under others to allow you to focus on the most important part while still giving you the ability to open the rest of them up if it's needed. Right? There are ways on how to battle this, but usually a rule of thumb, don't use donut chart when you have like tens of different of categories that you're looking into. That's typical recommendation. And a few other last things that I wanted to remind you guys is, these webinars and everything is possible because our company allows us to do this, right? So one of the things that we would greatly appreciate is, because I know there's some of you who are probably joining these sessions for the first time, or it's the first time you even heard about a company called Zoom Charts, right? Okay, some charts, cool. But it would be great if you could follow us on LinkedIn. LinkedIn is one of the resources where we post about all of the news, a lot of useful resources. So give us a follow, would be greatly appreciated, right? Because all the news, all the posts, everything that's happening is inside of here, right? A lot of useful information. And one of the kind of bits that I would recommend you to kind of also look into or go through, there's not a lot of text. This probably takes you like 2 or 3 minutes to go through, but take a look at this post. I'm actually going to post a link to it as well. So this is a post that we posted specifically regarding to the challenge as well. And for financial analysis, what sort of visuals to use and what sort of dimension when you're talking about category-based data, when you're talking about time-based data or anything like that, how to look at them, how to showcase them, and so forth. So it's a nice little bit of information that you can always utilize there. Because the main thing is, remember, guys, what we're trying to do with all of this is to provide you with an environment where you can learn, you can try out new things, you can test your skills, you can see how you compare or, kind of compete against other Power BI analysts and data report creators. So utilize the resources, make the best report possible, and a few other last things probably. Report examples. Yeah, report examples also is something that you can look into. I'll give you a link in just a second. Sorry if I'm looking to the side, it's just because there's a second monitor. So use also this link if you want to. So this one goes to the report examples. And in the report examples, you can find other challenge winning reports. So you can kind of look, for example, what other people are doing with different data, but at least the visual styling options or so forth. You can also open up any one of them like this. Just simply click on it. You can open up the interactive version of it, or you can also download the PBIX. So you can look at how the visual was set up, how to do what you're trying to do, or what columns were used for this and so forth. Not every single thing is going to be super easy straight away always. So this is why you have a lot of different resources and a lot of different approaches to how to handle similar types of data. All right. Any other questions? Any recommendations? Any judgment from your side? Anything? Yeah, for regarding the feedback, if you have anything you want to say, I don't know, you liked the session, you really disliked it, was boring as hell, never want to be here again, or it wasn't super useful and you want to see more about it, make sure that you fill in the forms. So there's a link from Sabina as well in the chat regarding the feedback forms. And the feedback forms just allows us to understand where you stand with our sessions. Was it worth it? Are we talking about what you were expecting? Completely off topic? What else are you trying to see here? Kind of what topics do you want us to cover? Any feedback that you have, let us know about it through the feedback forms. That's one of the sources where we can get your actual opinion, right? Because trust me, the last thing I want to do is just have webinars just because I want to have webinars. No, trust me, I don't want to do that. I want to have webinars as long as they're giving you valuable sort of insights or new knowledge that you're getting out of it. Otherwise, it's not really useful. Ola is asking, will there be a replay to this webinar? Yes, every single webinar that we host is recorded, and the recording will be available to you afterwards, usually a day or two, and then we send it to you in email, so you're going to be able to rewatch the session, or if you just joined, you're going to be able to actually watch the whole session from the beginning. Can we have a sample Power BI copy? Yeah, sure. Butchered the question, sorry, but Michelle, yeah, I'll add the sample report as well, and our team will send it out together, probably with the recording. I'll give this one to you as well. Just make sure that that's one of my part of this, right? Make sure you just, because we've had this happening before. I don't know why people think that's a great idea, but don't submit just exactly what we add to the sample gallery or kind of send it to you, just changing the colors, right? It's easy to notice this. So try to make it interesting. Try to make it yours. Change some of the visuals, styling options, cards, measures, add something from you. Don't just take the same report and submit it. Trust me, you're not going to be in the top 5. Even if that would be the best report out there, you would still wouldn't be in the top 5, just the principle. Um, Another question, and can we past webinars? Yeah, sure. Every single, I think, right? Actually, Sabina, you can correct me on this, but all the registered participants, even if just new ones for this webinar, can actually view all the recordings on our website for the past webinars. Should be available. Yeah, if you open up resources and webinars, your previous webinar, these are upcoming, but there are also previous ones which you can open up. If you already have signed up, you can fill in the form. It's going to be the same information, but just get a link to it and rewatch it. Should be all good. Yeah. All right. Not going to be wasting any much of more of your time. I really appreciate for you guys to tune in. I hope this session itself was interesting and you actually managed to learn something new. Otherwise, what am I doing here? But good luck with your reports. Be as creative as you want it to be. Make some challenges for yourself. Try to make this interesting. And I'll see you in the top 5 announcement together with our CEO, Yanis Wolbergs, to go through the reports and give you our opinion and feedback on the reports. So good luck, and I'll see you in the next webinar. Bye, everyone.